You already know this story. You may have heard it as a child. You may have told it to someone yourself without ever learning the name of the man it belongs to. An old lord is dying. He calls his 3 sons to his bedside. He hands each of them a single arrow and tells them to break it. Each arrow snaps between 2 fingers. Then he takes 3 arrows, binds them together, and passes the bundle around the room. Not one of them can break it. Alone, you snap. Together, you hold. Then he closes his eyes. It is the most famous lesson in Japanese history. It is repeated in classrooms. A professional football club carries it in its name. And it did not happen. Not in that room. Not with those 3 sons. The reason it could not have happened tells you far more about the man than the fable ever did. It also tells you why the thing he actually left behind outlived him by 300 years. His name was Mori Motonari. He was born in 1497 into a family that mattered to almost no one. The Mori were kokujin, which means simply local landholders, small lords of a small district in Aki province, the land that is Hiroshima today. They were not daimyo, the great regional warlords who ruled provinces. They were the people great warlords used.
Aki sat in the scene between 2 giants, the Ouchi to the west and the Amago to the north, and a family like the Mori survived by choosing a side, and by choosing correctly. Motonari was a second son. Second sons did not inherit. He should have been a footnote. Instead, his father drank himself to death. His elder brother died young. His nephew, the boy heir, died as a child. In 1523, the head of the Mori was a man who had never been meant to hold anything, standing in a small hilltop castle called Yoshida-Koriyama, surrounded by neighbors who could field 10 times his men. Picture the country he woke up in. Historians call it Sengoku, the age of the warring states, 100 years in which the emperor in Kyoto reigned but did not rule. The shogun's government commanded almost nothing beyond its own gate, and every province decided its own future with steel. Rank meant nothing, blood meant nothing. The word for it was Gekokujo, which means, plainly, the low overthrowing the high. Retainers murdered their lords, sons deposed their fathers. So what does a small man do in a world like that? Here is the first thing you should know about Motonari. He almost never fought a battle he had not already won somewhere else first.
In 1540, the Imago came for him. 30,000 men climbed into the hills around Yoshida-Koriyama and settled in to starve him out. He had perhaps 3,000. He did not ride out. He held the mountain through the winter, bled the besiegers with raids in the dark, and waited for the Ochi relief he had already arranged before the first enemy banner appeared. The siege broke. He had not won by strength. He had won by knowing, months earlier, exactly who would be standing behind him. And then, 10 years later, he did something that no parable about loving fathers will ever explain. The Inoue were his own retainers, an old, powerful family inside the Mori house who had helped raise him up and had grown convinced they could not be touched. They ignored his orders. They took what they wanted. In 1550, Motonari moved against them in a single coordinated strike and destroyed them. Inoue Motokane was killed. So were roughly 30 members of his family. Then Motonari had his surviving retainers sign a written oath of loyalty to him personally, and the Mori house was never divided from the inside again. He was 53 years old. He had just proven he would kill his own people to make his own people safe.
Ask yourself, honestly, whether that was cruelty or arithmetic. Because the record shows he was doing the same thing to everyone else, from a distance, without ever drawing a sword. The Imago clan had an elite fighting corps drawn from their own kinsmen, the Shingu-to. In 1554, the Imago lord had them wiped out, his own relatives, his best troops. He killed them himself, on suspicion, and many accounts of the war lay the seed of that suspicion at Motonari's feet, whispered in from outside. Historians argue about how much of that hand was really his. What is not disputed is the pattern. Again and again, the men who stood against Motonari were destroyed by people who loved them. And in the West, the Ouchi, his own protectors, fell apart. In 1551, a senior retainer named Su Harukata turned on his lord, Ouchi Yoshitaka, and forced him to take his own life. Gekokujo, exactly on schedule. Su now held the strongest army in western Japan, and Motonari had lost the shield he had stood behind for 30 years. Su had about 20,000 men. Motonari had somewhere near 4,000. So, Motonari built a fort.
He built it on Itsukushima, the island of the great red torii gate standing in the sea, the island so sacred that for centuries the dying were carried off it so that death would not touch its soil. He built the fort badly, in a place too narrow to hold an army, and then he let word reach Su that he bitterly regretted building it there at all. Su took the island. 20,000 men poured onto a strip of shore with a mountain at their back and water on every side, and there was no room for 20,000 men to be 20,000 men. On a storm night in October 1555, Motonari crossed the water in the dark, in weather no commander was supposed to sail in. He landed behind the enemy camp. His son came in from the front by sea. The Sioux army woke inside a trap it had walked into, on ground it could not maneuver on, and it did not survive the morning. Sioux Harukata died by his own hand on the island. And then Motonari did the strangest thing of that entire day. He had the shrine and the ground purified, the bodies removed, the blood washed from the shore, the soaked earth itself carried away, and the buildings scrubbed. The man had just used a god's island as a killing box, and he cleaned it like a guest who had broken something in someone else's house. 16 years later, he ruled 10 provinces.
From a hill fort and 3,000 men, he had taken almost the entire western third of Japan. Now, the arrows. Look again at the scene you have in your head. 3 sons at the deathbed. Motonari died in 1571, and here is the problem with the picture. His eldest son, Takamoto, died in 1563, 8 years earlier. The 3 sons could not stand in that room. There was no bedside with 3 men beside it. The most famous lesson in Japanese history is a scene that had no cast. The arrows are almost certainly a later invention, an Edo period story, polished and passed down until it felt like memory. But something real is sitting underneath it, and it is far better than the fable. On a day late in 1557, 14 years before he died, in full health, with all 3 sons alive, Motonari sat down and wrote them a letter. 14 articles. It survives. You can go and see it. Held by the Mori Museum in the city of Hofu. It is called the Sanshi Kyokunjo, the instruction to 3 sons. And it is not the calm speech of a wise old man. It is anxious. It is repetitive. He tells them over and over in different words that the 3 of them must not let the Mori house divide. He reminds them that he came from almost nothing. He worries about what happens when he is gone. He is not handing down a proverb. He is begging. He had good reason to beg. He had already scattered his own sons into other families. His second son, Motoharu, he sent into the Kikkawa clan as their heir. His third, Takakage, into the Kobayakawa. 2 rival houses, absorbed not by war but by adoption, and turned into the 2 arms of his own. The Mori called them the 2 rivers. Do you see what he had done? He had spent his life proving that any house can be broken from the inside, because he was the one breaking them. The Amago, the Ouchi, the Inoue. He knew exactly how a family dies, because he had killed families for a living, and that knowledge is what terrified him about his own. The letter is not a lesson about unity. It is the confession of a man who had seen what he was capable of, and could not be certain his sons were any different. So he did not trust the letter to hold. He rebuilt the family itself, so that unity was not a virtue his sons had to choose. It was a structure they could not step out of. It held. His grandson Teramoto inherited, with the 2 rivers on either side of him.
And when the Modi finally bet on the losing side of Japan's greatest battle in 1600, the house was not destroyed.
It was pushed to the far western edge of the country and told to stay there. It stayed for 2.5 centuries. It kept its name, its records, its memory, and its grudge. And in the 1860s, out of that same western domain, came the men who tore down the shogunate's government and built modern Japan. The bundle did not break. You can still see the shape of it today. In Hiroshima, the football club plays at Sanfrecce. San for 3 in Japanese, frecce for arrows in Italian. Salarymen quote the 3 arrows in meetings about teamwork. Children learn it and remember it for life. Every one of them is remembering a scene that never took place, and every one of them is, without knowing it, remembering the letter underneath it, written by a frightened man in 1557, whose real lesson was never that families are strong when they stand together. His lesson was the opposite. He knew, better than anyone alive, how easily a family comes apart. That was the whole point. That was why he wrote. So, you know this story. You have probably told it yourself. But now you know what the old man was really holding out to his sons, and it was never the arrows. It was his fear.